Fantastic. All right, well, my name is Lural Ramirez and I'm the head of school here at UWC Thailand. We're going to continue to allow folks to come on in. It typically tend to trickle in a bit as we start our webinars. But thank you again for joining us today. We're really excited to have you here with us. I'm excited to be joined today by a couple of amazing English language acquisition teachers that we have here at UWC Thailand. And so I'll start off, go ahead, Colin, by beginning with a bit of an introduction of who we've got here to work with you all today. And we'll also go through a bit of expectations as far as how we're going to run the webinar today. So if you look up on your screen, they're going to be highlighted for you. We've got a couple of really fantastic panelists who will be joining me for a really interesting discussion today. And we're also hoping that you will join us for this discussion. So as I said, my name is Lural Ramirez and I'm the head of school here at UWC Thailand. I'm a native English speaker out of the US, but I'm bilingual in both English and Spanish. I'm currently the head of school here in Thailand, but I was head of school prior to this at an amazing jungle school in Costa Rica. Prior to being a head of school, I was a curriculum leader and school-wide language program coordinator. And before that, a language immersion teacher. So I started out in my career as an educator in dual language immersion programs, which is really a wonderful space to be in. I'm really excited to have this conversation today with a couple of amazing language teachers. We've got joining us today, Nick, who is our middle school ESOL teacher here at UWC Thailand. Nick has over 25 years experience working as a teacher and setting up ESOL programs in Thailand and in the UK. And he is a speaker of English, Greek, and Thai. So bringing lots of linguistic knowledge to the table. And he will be joined in the conversation by Siaji. Siaji is our primary school ESOL teacher here at UWC Thailand with 15 plus years of experience as a language teacher. And Siaji is multilingual, so multilingual. He didn't even list the languages for me there. Siaji, which languages is that?
I speak a couple of languages. I speak English, Swahili, Luo, a bit of Kikuyu. I think I'm fairly proficient in Thai now to a certain level. And I speak French fairly okay. I wouldn't get lost in Paris.
Which is all that matters. Thank you, Siaji. Wonderful. Go ahead and head on to the next slide, Colin, please. So just some reminders and some encouragement. If you can please keep your microphone on mute, that will help make sure that we can all hear our speakers. As I said earlier, if you can rename yourself in the chat, that will help us form a bit of a community as we come together for the webinar today. Please consider keeping your video on to also build that community. It's nice to see one another and to feel like we're having this engaging communication and dialogue together. So if you can, we'd appreciate that. At any point in time, after you've shared where you're joining us from in the chat, throughout the discussion, if you want to join in via the chat with any questions or comments, please do so. We really love our audience participation in these webinars, so please interact with us in the chat. Feel free also to use those emojis if you really like what you're hearing and you want to show that with the emojis. We love to see those reactions on the screen. And when we get to the second part of our presentation today, if you have any questions and you'd like to ask those questions orally, feel free to raise that digital hand and we'll call on you to go ahead and speak. So we're going to be holding a structured dialogue between our two panelists, Nick and Siaji, and they'll be responding to some best practice research and some considerations that we'll think about when we consider English language acquisition for academic success. So the panelist discussion will be the first section of the webinar, and then we'll have that open question and answer following the panel discussion. All right, so let's go ahead and get ourselves started. And as I said, feel free to engage with us in the chat. And we're just going to start the dialogue here for you. So we're going to start off by considering a bit the attitudes on language that are consideration when we think about English language acquisition. So if you look into the research on English language acquisition, oops, go ahead and go back if you can for me, Colin. It shows that English language acquisition is a top priority for parents and students. This is something highly sought after, and research will show that across the world, no matter where we tend to be, that globalization is telling us that people are really interested in their children being proficient in English. Simultaneously, though, researchers confirm that a child's home language development is crucial for their long-term academic development, as well as their strong sense of personal identity. So research shows that home language development is crucial, and parents want English. So Nick and Siaji, how do you address this dual reality in your work as language teachers? Siaji, you want to go ahead and start?
I was hoping you would start with Nick, but I'll go first. First of all, thank you so much, Lural and communications team from UWC for organizing this. I appreciate this opportunity. It's a once in a lifetime, so thank you. I'm pretty nervous, so if my voice keeps going on and off, I'll try and kind of switch my microphone off and pretend that I'm on, my microphone's got problems and all that. It's just because I'm going in to refresh my throat. As you mentioned, and also I'd like to thank everybody who's got the opportunity to come and join us here. I see a couple of common faces that I have had to interact with. I see the likes of people like Juma Nyamori that I went back to high school with and are now professionals in the same line of career as I follow. To answer the question, Lural, the attitude on this duality of language, I believe in research, and I believe that, yes, mother tongue does foster critical thinking of students, and it fosters the growth of cultural identity for students. And I think that a lot of times when I have conversations with parents, I make them aware that I am a big advocate for students speaking in their home language. I do remember once when I was working with students, and I was fairly new in teaching English, and one of the administrators came to my classroom to observe, and they said, "Why do I notice that a lot of students don't really speak in English? This is an English class, what's going on?" And I remember my response to them. I said, as long as the task that they produce to me is in English, anything that they discuss, they're transferring their knowledge to English. They're translating that knowledge into English. As long as what they produce to me is in English for that task and for the objective of that task is okay. And how do I address this? I make it very obvious to parents that, being in an English language classroom, English language learning classroom, is not just a matter of speaking in English. I often say that if you walk into a primary school language classroom and all students are quiet, one, they're either doing silent reading, or they're writing, or they don't know what they're doing. So it's got to be students speaking, and they can use their mother tongue if they're willing, as long as the task is produced in English. I see my role as the person who takes on the knowledge that the students have, that they prior knowledge that they have in their mother tongue, and give them the skills to be able to translate that knowledge into English. It's not an easy thing for many people that want to push for English language skills and to push for academic English to get higher there. But with consistency and then giving them the chance, making them able to trust you and give you the patience to understand that it will come, then it comes. I always say that, there's a quote by Spencer Kagan, and he says that if you want them to listen, if you want them to hear, keep talking. But if you want them to learn, let them talk. And so I let them use their mother tongue so then they can learn from each other. So personally, that's how I would deal with it. I'm not sure if that answered your question, Laura, but I think
that's beautiful.
Something to add on to that.
And for those of you that are research nerds in the background, what we heard Siaji say there was that he takes an additive approach, right? So really valuing that mother language and then adding English on and valuing the contributions that the mother tongue can bring throughout the process. Now, Nick, you work with students at the later years. And so when you see that dual reality, how do you work with that as a language teacher?
Okay, thanks very much. And thanks again to you, Laurel, and the comms team today, and a very warm welcome to everyone. You know, the UWC movement embraces cultural diversity, and we certainly celebrate it here. We value these cultural differences and actively incorporate them into our teaching. I mean, differences are to be celebrated. Sometimes new parents and students might have a different expectation of what education is. For some parents and students, a cultural adjustment is sometimes needed. And this can depend on the child, their personality, the parents' understanding of our school and our philosophies. And that's why it's so important to explain what we do to the parents and to build that trust and understanding, as Siaji was saying. It's important that parents and students feel at ease with their own culture and indeed place value on it. And that's very important. In the classroom, I try to have a very positive attitude to new cultural influences, together with the maintenance of a student's home language. And culture, I think, is the best circumstance for any child. And I relate to that because I grew up in a Greek family, but in London. So I understand balancing my home language and also learning English at school. As a teacher, I always try to be a positive, supportive force in the adjustment process for students. I speak with parents, I reassure them. I try to create a classroom environment in which a variety of differences are valued. And we incorporate these differences into our classroom and learn about the culture of the students. So we routinely look at similarities, differences, connections, and many of our units of studies link very much to these. And another part of what we do in the middle school in terms of maintaining the home language, we offer a fantastic mother tongue program as a language choice to all non-native English users in grades 6 to 10. And this is something that we've worked hard to incorporate in the school. And that really does support students in their home, in their mother tongue too.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because I appreciate the contribution in the chat there from our participant Tan, wondering about, you know, what is that appropriate terminology? Do we call it mother tongue, home language? It's such a struggle, right? To feel like you're using the term that might best describe the experience. And I'm with you, Tan. I feel like there's no term that is perfect. And so, yeah, if anyone's got one that they've found is the most appropriate to context, throw it in the chat. We'd love to all learn as well. Let's move on in our discussion to thinking a bit about supporting progressive language development. So as a parent, teacher, or student, it can be difficult to know how to best support a consistent development of language proficiency over time. And this is an issue that as teachers will hear quite often from both students and from parents and even fellow teachers, right? Who are quite mindful and hopeful to be doing everything they can and just not sure how to continue that progress of language acquisition over time. So research shows that fluency in additional language is likely to take 5 to 7 years. As language acquisition teachers, Nick and Siaji, what has been your experience with this process with your students? And are there any keys to supporting consistent student growth and development linguistically? Nick, do you want to start us off there?
Yeah, sure. As you said, language proficiency takes several years, but it also takes a great deal of commitment. Students have got to have a strong desire to learn a language and must be genuinely interested in it. They've got to take risks in the classroom and they've got to be willing to make mistakes, I think. And that's all part of the learning process. And they've also got to be committed to language outside of the classroom and use language in different environments. To access the MYP and DP here, I mean, I really respect so many of our students because they've got to learn how to speak fluently and accurately. They need to learn how to write for so many different purposes, like, I mean, just to name a few, to construct an opinion essay, a comparative essay, to write reports, convincing letters, emails, reviews, creative stories. In middle school, they've got to do personal projects, later at DP, extended essays that require really advanced writing skills. And they need to learn how to research, how to plan. Then in terms of reading, there's so many things that they've got to do. They've got to understand complex texts, make inferences, summarize. They've got to understand register and audience. And they've got to understand a lot of content. I think that students that enjoy reading will improve at a much faster rate and cope with the academic language demands of school and further education. And I always really try and encourage students to read and give them a love of reading. I mean, in a nutshell, students need to be proficient in every single linguistic area. They've got to overcome shyness, inhibition, pronunciation challenges, and they've got to operate in a classroom, sometimes with native speakers. At our school, we've got such a diverse group of teachers, and we all have different regional accents, I'd say. And so for these reasons, achieving proficiency in English is a huge feat. But for those students that undertake this challenge, the rewards are very, very significant and long-term, I'd say. To help stage progression for students, we use frameworks, internationally recognized frameworks. For example, the Common European Framework of References. And what they do is they separate English progression into basic, independence, and then proficiency. So these internationally recognized levels, they're great at setting short-term goals for students and helping them to improve gradually. I think that according to research from Cambridge, it might take up to like 200 hours of study to move from one level to the next. But having been at this school for about 12 years, though, I've seen students arrive in grade 6 with very, very limited English. And then I've seen them study English as a first language by grade 10. And I mean, it's just amazing. So it is possible. But my key thing is, it's not just about several years. Students need to work really, really hard and be committed to do that as well.
And it's so tricky, isn't it? For those of you that are language teachers out there, I think we've all experienced that anomaly of a child who doesn't seem to follow any research pattern. And though it says it should take 5 to 7 years, they acquire it in warp speed. And then there's others of us who have tried to acquire in a language and tried, and it just feels like it never quite gets there. So it can be challenging. Thank you, Nick. That was so helpful. So tell us, Siaji, are you using a similar framework to what Nick has described? How is that done, maybe similarly or differently, or has your experience been such in the primary years?
Yes, Lural, interestingly, I think it might be different from many schools that I have observed. Nick and I use a consistent framework from grade 1 through to when students exit, so that by the time the students exit grade 5 and go into the secondary school, the transition becomes something that I can give Nick a report, and Nick will be able to say, you know what, I know exactly what's going on here. We use the University of Cambridge Young Learners English in the primary school, and then Nick advances that forward. And but as he mentioned, we use the Common European Framework of References, but then we also supplement these with other programs, because I believe that language programs can complement or supplement each other. So we've gone to training for other programs like WIDA, and we've looked at some of their standards and we liked them. There are some, I believe that there are instances that you could pick from programs and then you're growing something further. And it actually aligns with our mission, which means, making education a force to unite people. So then we're uniting programs, but then having a framework that is consistent has helped us a lot, right? One of the things that I believe fosters student learning is, as Nick mentioned, the goals for the student, for language. I believe that the Cambridge language, the Young Learners exams are easy and they're user-friendly and they're not intimidating as compared to other programs that we have used. They are very specific, so the students can understand, and they really are simple to follow. But most importantly, they're easy to assess for teachers. And I have observed different assessment programs that are very tedious for teachers. You get a grade 3 student sitting for a test for six hours plus, and that can be a bit tedious. We want our students to enjoy the language that they communicate with. I've always said that there are two ways of looking at English. You're looking at English in our school as a medium of communication, and then you're looking at English as a subject, a content-specific subject. As a medium of communication, you're giving the students skills to be able to interact and play with their friends and ask for permission and get help and speak at the assembly and so on. As a subject, you're looking at a very specific, content-specific language. So you're growing their social skills in English and growing their academic skills in English. And I think there are a good number of language teachers in here, and they would understand that I'm talking about the basic interpersonal communication skills and the cognitive academic language proficiency. And so this one, I feel like our English language learners, as students that learn English as an additional language or as a second language, they are at an advantage in the sense that they're learning the social skills alongside the academic skills, right? And ideally, that is a situation or an environment that we have created for students at UWCT.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, Siaji, thank you for pointing that out, because oftentimes I've heard adults say, you know, why am I as an adult struggling so much to acquire an additional language, whereas children are learning it so quickly? But I think sometimes if you read through the research on that, a lot of it comes down to the right balance of opportunity, right? So if as an adult, I were also to have an entire school day available to me as I acquire language, where I'm allowed these social opportunities and I'm also allowed this academic and cognitive input, you know, it's that perfect balance between those opportunities that really fosters language acquisition. And that's why us adults outside of a school setting that's a little bit more formal, we sometimes lack that balance of opportunities to acquire language. So really, really meaningful. Thank you so much for those inputs. So let's talk a little bit now about the impact of the learning environment. There's so many factors that contribute to academic English language success. Researchers emphasize the importance of an optimum learning environment in order to support language learning. Nick and Siaji, can you share with us the keys to English learning success that you've identified in practice at schools? And is there anything that parents can do at home to help with an impactful learning environment? I'll let you guys decide who goes first.
I'm happy to speak first. Is that all right, Siaji? I mean, the number one thing, I like to see the students smiling when they come to my classroom. In other words, they enjoy it. They look forward to coming to this class. And at this school, we're lucky in that we have relatively small class sizes. It's really important to foster a really caring, supportive environment where students are more willing to take risks with language. Make sure that the students get more of a chance to speak than the teacher does. That's very, very important, I'd say. So you need you need to be committed to a balance of receptive and productive skills. Again, going back to the first question that you asked us, really embrace and explore different cultural differences so we can learn from each other, build empathy with your students, know your students well, learn about them, learn about their culture, ask them questions. In terms of activities, it's such a wonderful subject to teach because you can do so many fun activities and pair work and group work. And I love setting presentations, realistic presentations for students. So when they're up presenting to a class, and it might be about their future in 1 year, in 5 years, in 10 years, and then finally when they're at 40 or 50, and they're sharing these ideas, and the first time they do it, they're nervous. And of course they are, but we as a class, we all support each other. And then you see the confidence growing. And as soon as you have that confidence growing and students really, really buy into it, then you know that they're going to improve quickly. I have gone and observed quite a few other classes as well. And I do think sometimes teachers unintentionally hinder learning. And I'm just going to, sometimes people don't give clear instructions maybe. And I think that you've got to think about these things, the instructions that you give to students, simple things, asking students, do you understand? That doesn't really help. You need to ask open questions. make sure that you really get to know your students well. In terms of parents, I would tell parents, encourage your child, take an interest in their learning, ask them what they've been doing, because they do so many cool things here, and it's a great way for the student then to share that with the parents. I'd also say to parents, make sure that your child commits to reading, and saying that, give them an environment that supports that as well. There are also a number of interactive resources that students can do outside of the classroom that reinforce their learning. And I love one very short story. One of my students, a young Chinese girl, works through these resources with her mum, who's now learning English through her daughter. And I thought, what a great connection. So really, for parents, take an interest and ask questions and see what they're doing as well.
That really doubles that risk taking, doesn't it, Nick? Right? If we as adults are stepping in and saying, I'm going to try as well, what beautiful modeling for our children. That's really
absolutely
cool. Siaji, as a primary school teacher, you must have a lot of interaction and engagement with parents. Is there anything that parents can do at home to help with the learning environment? And what do you think are those keys to success in the school environment as well?
I think Lural, not just the parents, but I think the whole school community should be involved in growing a student's language learning, right? So the key thing is, I think parents need to understand the language policy of the school and what the school believes about the growth of a child's language. And this is not just English, we're looking at every other language whatsoever. One of the things, as I mentioned earlier, I say to parents is, remember the child is at school for at least 8 hours, 7 plus, sometimes 9. And then sometimes the students go and extend their language knowledge, English language knowledge elsewhere. So then they're constantly participating in English. And unfortunately, the home language is sort of overlooked sometimes. And what I say to parents is, whichever involvement you have, get that engagement from your child as much as you can in your mother tongue, so that if your child read a story about Bill and Tan, so then you can ask questions in your mother tongue, nani mbaya kule, shida ilikuwa nini, nani, who is the protagonist, who is the antagonist, what themes do you see in here? So therefore, you're growing both your mother tongue and, or you're growing both your home language, and you're growing the conceptual understanding of the student also in English as well, based on reading and comprehension. And so training of the community is important, but also for teachers to understand the expectations of the language. And as Nick mentioned earlier, Buddha said that, if your mouth is open, you're really not learning. So let the kids talk, let the students talk, let them explore. If you have motivated learners, who understand their goals, who understand their assessments and their expectations, they know that I need to get from level 1 to level 2, but this is what I need to do, then you're creating a successful program in language learning.
Yeah, it truly is so beautiful when it's a partnership, right? And that home environment and the school environment can really be partners in that learning process. I think we can all agree, and I see so much agreement coming through in the chat, which is really beautiful. Thank you so much for participating in the chat, that there's that acknowledgement of how important both environments are. Let's talk a little bit about teacher quality. It's really interesting to look at the research on teacher quality as a determining factor in student success. And so as we look at English language acquisition for academic success, teacher quality is a factor to be considered. Research on teacher quality is pretty fascinating. A top quality teacher results in students with higher overall achievement levels, stronger university admissions results, and even better long-term earnings potential. So there's quite an impact on the quality of the teacher working with students. For both of you, Nick and Siaji, specific to language acquisition, what are the qualities that you think are the most essential in a language teacher who seeks to positively impact student language learning?
I'll let you go first this time, CRG.
Nick, we could go the rock, paper, scissors. And we do that in the primary, it works. Do you want to go? All right. Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. All right, Nick, you go.
Thanks, Laurel. I've been asked this question quite a few times, and I have given it some thought, what makes a good teacher, what qualities. And I've got a very clear idea in my mind what they are. The first one is you need to know your subject. It's difficult to teach something if you don't know your subject, but you can learn that. And that's something that you can learn. The second challenge is when we speak about taking students from a basic level all the way to proficiency, you need to be an excellent planner as a teacher. You need to sequence a series of lessons working towards an end goal. You need to make it interesting. You need to make it fun, engaging, topical, and current. You need to check students' knowledge, so you need to build in assessments as well. And so being a good planner is an essential skill as a language teacher, I'd say. We can all have one great lesson, but as I said, over a series of years, that's about good planning. But you can learn to plan too. My third quality, and this is by far the most important one, I'd say, and that's you, that's your persona, that's who you are. And it's about how you can create empathy. It's about building bonds. It's about encouraging. It's about helping. I mean, sometimes I have good relationships with my students. I might need to counsel them if they're having any problems. I believe that students learn about themselves, not only as learners, but as people in this process. And that's very valuable. I also say that it's very important not to be fearful of honest feedback. And that's something that I ask my students again and again. If you include them in their learning, they'll always respond very positively. I've working in international schools for many years. I know that sometimes people use ESOL teaching as a stepping stone to something else. I haven't done that. I've been an ESL teacher for almost 30 years now, and my greatest satisfaction remains seeing students improve in English and going off to language A. And you know what? The students know that and they feel it. So you said the word partnership before. I believe it's a partnership. And I'm still in contact with some of the students that I taught 30 years ago. So it's a wonderful thing. Yeah. And so, yeah, know your subject, be a good planner, and have the right persona.
I would just add one quick one and mention that you've got to be dynamic as a language teacher, because you're also a language learner. Very few of us understood that at one point we would ever have meetings online or teach online. So understanding that at every point you've got to stay in tune and understand what's going on around the world. So the way you taught language 20 years ago, the way you taught language 10 years ago won't be the same tomorrow. So stay in touch and understand, get some training if you can. This is also for the leadership in the chat or in the joining us and listening in. Get your teachers trained so that they understand the new modes of teaching. Get your teachers to understand ways that students would best learn language and so on.
Yeah, thank you. And thinking about how leaders, or, you know, we might have some language department coordinators on this call, let's move into some structural elements of schools and how those might contribute to the experience for language learners. So if we think about those key school structural supports, research indicates that the way school leaders structure learning opportunities and the resources they provide to programming has a strong correlation on student success. For both of you, Nick and Siaji, what structures and resource supports have you found to be key in student language learning success? And what role does assessment specifically play in that success?
Nick, I'll go first this time. Lural, I think one of the advantages that our program here at UWCT have is that we have created a very flexible timetable for our students. And a timetable that offers opportunities for our students to have small group interactions and small group instruction with the teachers, and opportunities for them to interact as a whole group in their homeroom language. And so we have a timetable where I work with students in the primary that they get pull-out support, and then I go into the classroom and give them in-class support as well. When they go for small group, when they come for small group instruction with me, we deal with, as we mentioned earlier, English is not necessarily just a social language, it's not just a medium of communication. We look at the very grammatical structures of language, the areas that the student might need specific instruction in. And when we go into the classroom for in-class support, if they're looking at literacy, if they're looking at maths, we go and extend that academic knowledge in the classroom. So timetabling is important, but also offering that opportunity for teachers and students to access each other. We have, as Nick mentioned, we have a very diverse staff on here. UWC is big on deliberate diversity, and I believe that students should be able to access every aspect of language, be it accent, be it culture of a different language, because it grows them in such a way that research says it's very, very useful. So that I will teach language and use African stories. You know, Nick will be teaching secondary school students, and all of a sudden they're dancing Kalamatiako's dance in the secondary. It is very fruitful and it works really well. So in terms of structural support, I would say timetabling is important, in line with also great space for the students to also learn, right? My classroom, I'm not sure if you could see my classroom. A lot of people come into my classroom and think it's a living room, right? So you create that environment where a space that the students are learning in is very comfortable. I'd like Nick to add on to the rest, please.
Well, it's such a beautiful idea, sorry to jump in there, Nick, of teachers as a resource, right? I think oftentimes we think, oh, I need to acquire a lot of things to teach language, but the people in the room are an amazing resource that we bring with them. Hopefully, Nick, you can talk a bit about assessment for us. What do you see as assessment playing a role in success?
But by the way, I just want to say, Siaji's so true when he says his classroom's like a living room. I think I saw a pair of socks on the floor there last time. Did I, Siaji? I'll say that assessment, we use it as a very positive tool for students to show their progress. So it's not a taboo for us to assess our students. We do it as a collective. So everyone knows everyone else's English scores, but we do it so we have the opportunity to support each other, to help each other. Assessment is a very valuable tool in that it allows students to show their progress, but also where it shows us where they need particular help as well. So it's only positive. And I explain that to students. Now, I do want to also speak about our program being flexible and progressive. In the middle school, we do something that not all schools do. So we really do put the student first. And this causes quite a few problems, administrative problems, timetabling problems. Let me just give you an example. If we have, for example, a grade 6 student who applies to the school, we do a very detailed assessment. We check their reading, writing, speaking, listening. We look at them as a person, their language history, so we can make a very informed decision on them. And for example, if a student we believe isn't quite able to cope in the English heavy subjects, what we do is we give them an additional up to 8 weekly periods of English. And in these periods, we target their specific needs. They're assessed regularly, and we do this so they can show their progress. And then what I love is as they improve, they join other subject areas, and you know what? They've earned their place in that class. You know, they've done it. So there are a number of benefits for doing that. And it's also challenging for the other teachers too, because they might have a student join their class, you know, in term 2 rather than term 1. But we all work together as a team, and we put the needs of the students first. And from my point of view, sometimes that means I'll have grade 6s with grade 7s and grade 10s all in the same room. I actually don't mind that. I embrace it, because when you've got multi-grade, multi-level, multilingual, it makes it an interesting class. And actually, we all learn from each other. I guess it's in grade 6 and 7 that we do this. By grade 8, 9, and 10, students have that ability. But I'm very grateful to the school that they do this, and that they actually follow the recommendations that we give, because it's worked for so many of our students. And I mean, ultimately, as I said, many of them will eventually join. Most of our students will join language A class if they're with us. And that's something that I've seen consistently over the last 12 years. If I may, Laurel, sorry, just one more thing. We also have a fantastic mindfulness program here at this school, and it's great being part of it. So what I've tried to do is, we've got a long-established mindfulness program, and there's so many opportunities to incorporate mindfulness practices into your classroom. So, for example, breathing as a tool before a presentation, noticing and reflecting, practicing kindness with others and supporting. And it's great when you do guided visualizations, where you use the senses to take students to a different place. It's a very, very powerful tool. And that's something that I've seen. I know other schools may do it, but I think something that we do really, really well here.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think, you know, it's interesting because as language teachers, we're always concerned about that effective filter, as research calls it. So that stress response that can make it nearly impossible to acquire language. And nothing like some mindfulness tools to lower your effective filter and allow you to have some receptivity to new language. We're going to head into one last discussion point, and then we're going to open this up to our community here joining us to be able to ask any questions you might have. So moving on to just our very last point. One of the interesting things about UWC Thailand, and many of you might be here because you're interested in this concept of a United World College, is that we receive admissions of students into grade 11 specifically for that first year of the IB diploma program. And we receive them from around the world. So they come to us from 150 different countries, nominated through admissions and selections process that we do not run, which is a really interesting factor. They come in, they've had these very diverse educational experiences. They come in with varying language levels of English proficiency. And we also accept students prior to that, outside of the UWC kind of nominations process, who come in at all ages and stages, grade 10 and below, with those language learning needs. So Nick and Siaji, I know that you both don't directly work necessarily with the DP program and those grade 11 and 12 students that come in, but in general, how do you see our programming supporting students at different grade levels as they work toward improving that English proficiency while achieving grade level studies? Because gosh, when they come in grade 11, I'm still kind of shocked by it sometimes, right? That they're coming in with 2 years when research says we need 5 to 7, and then they're still graduating with incredible results. What do you attribute that to? Nick, do you want to go ahead and start?
Yeah, actually, it's so cool meeting these students from all around the world every year, having this big influx of energy coming every year. Now, actually, my personal view on this, I wish the national committees would actually assess the English level of students, not to be exclusive, but to best help that student. At the moment, there's such a mixed bag. And from my conversations with colleagues at other UWCs, there's a lot of change between should a student be doing language B or language A. And there's a movement in that first term, there's a lot of switching. And I always think that they've only got 2 years, and time's very valuable. And if we had better data on the English level of these students, it would help us support them. And again, I'm saying this isn't to be exclusive, because if we knew that there was a need, what we could do is maybe in the form of an orientation course, or we can help these students. I have actually worked with some grade 11s in the past. And what we do is when they arrive, we will do a detailed assessment of them. But that's when they're here. We've also tried to do that online. The problem with that is sometimes we can get an idea of reading and writing, but to actually meet the student and understand their speaking and listening, it's a very difficult thing to do remotely. I mean, people come from lots of parts of the world, may not have access to technology. So, you know, it's quite a challenging thing. I think personally that the more information we have on students, the better we can help them. And even if we could have them a few weeks earlier, it may give a chance to do an orientation, almost like an English boot camp, where we assess them and then we give them the important skills that they need to be able to cope in the very challenging DP program.
Yeah, absolutely. Siaji, did you want to add anything into that?
I think one thing that we probably haven't mentioned is that I think our program is quite rigorous. It's fairly user-friendly, and the students get assessed and they feel the assessment and they're very willing to do them, but it's quite rigorous as well. We set very high and clear expectations for the students. We'll say, you know, for you to attain this, then you have to get to a certain level. And Nick has similar in the secondary as well. But this cannot be achieved without one of our biggest, I think one of our biggest win, and that's mindfulness, being mindful of what we have students from a very diverse world, and just understanding that this student has come from this background, and I'm mindful of perhaps their struggles, but I also understand that this has to be done. We have to get to a certain level. And so the partnership comes in here. We come and bring the parents in and support. We look at ways that we can give, if they need extra support for home learning, then we can offer that. But yes, so then when we use that and follow with the phases of language acquisition that the IB gives us, it creates a fairly conducive program for students.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Well, thank you so much, Nick and Siaji. This concludes the part of our presentation today that's more us kind of sharing in a dialogue and sharing with you all. We'd now like to open up some space as we head into the last 15 minutes or so of the webinar to be able to open up for any questions that the community might have. So I don't know if there's any questions that you want to pop into the chat, reflecting a bit on the words of our UWC founder, Kurt Hahn. Students should be encouraged to compete, not against each other, but with their own personal best and rigorous standards of excellence. Any questions from our attendees today? Anything that you would like to ask Siaji or Nick specifically? And I'm really happy to see we have a UWC Thailand alum in the chat here with us. I don't know if you want to jump in and talk at all. I know it's quite early in the morning where you're coming to us from your university in the US. But it is a really powerful experience, I think, for those grade 11 and 12 students to come in and to acquire so much in such a short amount of time, and then jump into some really amazing life experiences. Really beautiful indeed. Perfect. So we have a question in here, either one of you that might want to take it. What are your thoughts on native English speakers versus teachers who are second language learners themselves, then being the models for English language learning? Is, I'm guessing, how that question would end. Any thoughts on that, Siaji or Nick?
Yeah, I have some thoughts. Actually, I know so many ESOL teachers around the world, and I still believe if you know your subject and you can plan and you have a good persona, yeah, those are the important things. I think what does help is I remember struggling at school in England because of language, and so I can really, and I know that's the same for CRG. We can relate and connect to students, and I'll always say to the students, I know exactly how this feels because I went through the same thing. So let me help you. For me, no, because I'm going to upset any of my friends that are just English speakers that are very good teachers if I say that. But it does help when you've been through it, but it's not absolutely necessary by any means. What do you think, Siaji?
I think if you're proficient in a subject, if you're proficient in an art, you are proficient, whether you started it late or as a child, right? I think also, unfortunately, the world, this is a personal opinion. My personal opinion is many recruiters look at your passport and determine whether you're proficient in a language or not. So it's become a very tricky one. I believe that if you're proficient, you're proficient.
And I think that just echoing what Nick and Siaji are sharing, as a head of school, I place so much inherent value on multilingual staff members. And so I'm very much less interested in which the first language might have been, and very much more interested in all of the languages there and what you can do with them and how they might contribute to the way that you might approach the subject that you're bringing to students. Not to say that monolingual teachers are unwelcome, but I think additional language ability is just such a wonderful thing. So I echo the sentiment that what your first native language, home language, mother tongue, whatever we want to call it is so much less important than who you are right now today and what you might bring into the classroom. Question in here from one of our attendees. What do you do when you encounter a situation of having either an unmotivated or a student with maybe some disciplinary problems in the classroom and they're not really engaging with learning? What's your response to
that? Thank you very much for the question. I mean, it's difficult for any young child growing up because they're going through a process of development. And sometimes when they move to a new school as well. So again, it's so important to build that trust. What I find as well is I'll always speak to a child if I think they could be doing better, if there's something that they could be doing better. And other things that I connect with, we have so many fun activities at this school, like outside of the classroom. And if you can connect with someone just on a human level outside of the classroom, and when students feel that you're there to actually help them as well, and you make your classes fun and interesting, it's almost hard for them not to eventually do it. And there's a really nice feeling within the classroom. So when a new student comes in, everyone encourages them and helps them and makes them feel part of something. So, I mean, I could give a couple of examples here, but I don't know if many of those elder students are listening, and I won't, but I've had students that have been quite combative and didn't really want to, didn't really try hard. And, this is when they're in grade 6, 7, and 8. But then as they went through time, they became, they reached their potential as well. And it's just because they're growing up, but be patient, help and support. And if they know that you're there for them as well, as I said, students feel that. And so it's just got to be resilient and keep working with them.
Maybe it's just the inquiry-based teachers in us, right? But I always think when a child is not engaging, I wonder why. I'm curious about that. Why would that be? And hoping to kind of find out more about that to see how I might respond. Well, thank you so much to our two panelists for today. Thank you, Siaji. Thank you, Nick. And thank you to everyone who's been able to join us for the webinar. We're going to play a short video. If you haven't been on our webinars before, you might be able to discover a little bit more about UWC Thailand through the video. We hope that you'll be able to join us for upcoming webinars that we have. We've got a lot of really exciting topics that we'll be covering moving forward. You'll receive an email tomorrow that will give you a recording of today's webinar and also the slide presentation that we've shared. So you'll receive that by email. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We hope you enjoyed the video. Wonderful. Thank you so much. So our next webinar is scheduled for Thursday, March 10th. So coming up pretty quickly. And it's about the question, can students lead successful service projects? So if you're interested in supporting students in service learning, we look forward to having you join us then. Thank you again to our panelists. Thank you to everyone who's attended today, and have a wonderful afternoon, day, whatever it might be for you, wherever you're joining us from. Thank you so much.